Hello and welcome to episode 459 of the Stacey West podcast. My name is Gary. I will be guiding you through this evening's festivities and holding my hand metaphorically, but not literally, even though we would have nothing against it. It's just not our way. It's Chris Lamming. How are you?
Hello. Yeah, very well, thank you. Very well indeed. Our original plan today, Gary, me and Steph, was to do something, just go and do something together. But sadly, we haven't done that because my body's in absolute bits. I ended up playing football yesterday afternoon. Didn't know I was doing that until Thursday. Albeit only in goal. I was pretty busy, and my body is in bits today. So we've spent some of the day cooking a Sunday roast, and then prior to the last hour, me prepping for this, the rest of the afternoon watching Ludwig, as we discussed last night. Steph has watched it before. I hadn't seen it before, but she knew I'd like it, and we discussed it last night, of course, when we saw each other last night. So yeah, we've had a good afternoon watching Ludwig, which is very good, making a Sunday dinner and prepping for what I think hopefully is going to be quite an interesting discussion this evening. How are you?
Yes, we'll come on to that in a minute. Today's been really weird. It's that extra hour, isn't it? It's the hour that we've lost. Like, I'm in bed, I'm thinking it's 9 o'clock, I've had a bit of a lay and I'm going to get up, and Fee goes up to the clock and twists it round to 10. It's like, what are you doing? It's like, yeah, that's the time now. Like, oh, brilliant. So actually I'm in bed past 10 o'clock. I never normally do that. I'm a late riser some days, and then I felt a little bit jaded all day. I mean, I had not a lot last night, but it was Ben's 40th for people who were listening in. He was 40 a couple of weeks ago, or he was whatever birthday he wants to be. I don't think he wants people to say 40, but it's obvious he's not 30 and it's obvious he's not 50. So we did that. I had a little bit of what he'd made a cocktail in a jar and he'd put on top of it going up juice. And I had to have a couple of glasses of We're Going Up juice, which was nice. But
it was very tasty.
Yeah. It was, yeah. And a little bit of sadness because you and I introduced you yesterday to a restaurant that in my youth was one of my favorites. And for the last sort of 15 years or so, I haven't been. And the food came out and it was really good. We had a really nice time. And then as we were leaving, the owner said, I close up on Monday for good, which was the Modern on the High Street. So I was a little bit disappointed in that. I thought I'd been so smart that we thought we'd found this nice new place. Also, by the way, perfect for post-football on our way into town. Let's get a bite to eat. Drop in there. Never thought about it before, and now we have, and we can't do it again.
Indeed. Yeah, that was a little bit upsetting. We tried a couple of other places, didn't we, and couldn't get in. And that was one that you thought, yeah, let's give that a go. It used to be good, and it was this time round. And yeah, sadly, no more. But it was worth doing. It was a nice evening.
Yeah, it was. It was a nice evening indeed. Now, this is the Lincoln City podcast. And for the last 7 or 8 days, there has been no Lincoln City action, and that is literal. There's been no contracts. There's been no injury news. There's been nothing at all other than a little bit of ambiguity as to whether Rico Hackett was actually called up for St. Lucia or not. I think other than that, that's literally it, isn't it? And just for the record, the club did put something out saying that Rico Hackett had been called up. And then he doesn't seem to have been. And the same happened with Bolton, put something up saying Chris Farino had been called up, and then it didn't seem to happen. So whether there was a clerical error at St. Lucia's end, calling up players they weren't going to use, I'm not really sure. Whether they changed their call-up because it wasn't a competition. Because originally St. Lucia were meant to be playing Azerbaijan and Amman were meant to be playing Sierra Leone in this FIFA series, and then it would be a knockout, so they would go to a final. But a man pulled out because of the warmonger over in America deciding that he can bomb whoever he wants, wherever he wants. So, unfortunately, they've pulled out of the competition. And I wonder if St. Lucia adjusted their squad accordingly and thought, well, we won't bring in the big guns for this. We'll just, I think, because they were nearly all domestic players, weren't they? All players based over in the Caribbean. So,
yeah, maybe so. I know some people at the club have mentioned long lists and short lists before, haven't they, in terms of players being called up on a long list, but maybe don't always make that final cut as such, but just the final squad. Yeah, to be honest, we don't really know, but we don't mind, do we? It allowed us to have a break, and we're going to maybe discuss the benefits of that break later in reference to a previous break that we had. But we're all looking forward to all looking forward to some more football on Good Friday. But before that, of course, we've got another whole podcast to discuss with no actual football to talk about.
Yeah. Sorry, just to clarify, by the way, I did message the club to ask if Rico was on a long list when he was called up, because I said that he hadn't been mentioned in the press release, and I was told that their understanding at that point was that he had been called up. So, but St. Lucia didn't put their squad list out; everyone else did. So they do seem a little bit at odds. So yes, we have a podcast to do, and we have nothing really to look forward to. And I don't mean that as in we don't have anything to look forward to, because we do. Because on Friday it's going to be just carnage and it's going to be massive. But we'll be previewing that game on the Wednesday podcast. This is the Sunday podcast. We don't have anything to look back at. We're not going to talk about Stockport and Wimbledon, because whilst we made out that it matters, it really, really doesn't. We're going to look at kind of a Michael Skubala 10-point plan to the brink of history. So November 2023, Michael Skubala came into the club, and we know what the situation was as the manager came in. But what we decided to do was Chris and I picked 5 points each from the last, 2.5 years, let's say, the Michael Skubala era, in order to discuss and debate and kind of put a pin in them and go, we think this was a key moment in getting us to where we're going to be now. So, sorry, just in the comments, I've just seen it from Andy Townsend. I just wanted to touch on it. He says, Rico was called up on the long list, but not the short list. As Skubala said, we couldn't take the risk of someone getting injured and Rico then getting called up on a Friday night. So, hopefully, I know I'm going on about this, but the thing is, 2 or 3 people on the internet yesterday were saying, well, Stacey West said he had been called up and he hadn't played, and I just want to clarify that I had checked and double checked everything. So anyway, we've decided to talk about Michael Skubala. Chris is in the dark there, but I'm not. We decided to talk about Michael Skubala's reign. We've each picked 5 points. Now, the first point starts in the kind of after Christmas 2023, early 2024. So I think before that, we just ought to discuss the situation that Michael Skubala came into. So where were Lincoln City up until our first point? And the first point that I've mentioned is Wycombe Wanderers, which was the start of an unbeaten run and the start of a brilliant run. So just really quickly touching on it, from November 2023, Stevenage away through to Wycombe Wanderers, there isn't an awful lot that a manager can do other than start work. And it's like, if you have a whole 8 hours to do your day and you have a whole load of tasks, the first hour you'll get stuff done, but it doesn't sometimes feel like you've gone very far. And I think it was a chance, that period was a chance. Michael just came in, altered a few really basic things. He took a look at everybody. Everybody got a chance. Ali Smith got a chance. Jack Vale got a chance. Jaden Brown got a chance. Everybody was given an opportunity to impress. And it kind of, I think it finished, it was actually Blackpool. I can't remember if it was Blackpool, then the break, and then Wycombe was the first game that we came back into. But Blackpool was the nadir. That was we played, I think Jaden Brown played his last game for the club. I think Ali Smith did. I think Jack Vale did. There was just a host of players that just didn't. And
Jaden Brown played right wing back in that game.
Wow.
Jovon Makama played up front on his own because we didn't have any strikers. Yeah, and it was it was a tough moment, that. But as you can come on to, it got a lot better afterwards, didn't it?
Yeah, but we hadn't had a terrible period. There was one little glimpse into what we could expect, front-footed attacking football, and that was at Cambridge. We went and put a decent performance on at Cambridge, I think, early doors, probably the end of November, if I remember correctly, in Michael's reign. So we got a little glimpse, but we'll come straight on to the first point. I say straight on, it's not really. We've got 5 minutes per point, give or take. The first point for me, the one I've picked up, it's the Wycombe Wanderers game, but it's actually Ethan Arahan's late equaliser against Wycombe Wanderers. Now, the reason that I've picked this is early doors in a manager's career, there's always question marks over him, in my opinion. Like, innocent until proven guilty is the law of the land properly, but actually rubbish until proven good is a football manager's mantra. And I think we went through a really tough period. I mean, bear in mind, we won 3-0 at Cambridge. After that, actually, our results were drew with Wigan, lost to Accrington in the Football League Trophy, drew with Reading, lost to Derby, lost to Bolton, lost to Northampton, lost to Blackpool. So you're talking there 5 defeats in 6 games, 4 defeats in 5 league games. He's come in, he's steadied the ship a little bit, but at that point, just beginning to rock. And at that point, there were on social media points like sleepwalking into relegation. So this is really early doors. Michael Skubala's got no credit in the bank, really, with anybody at that moment. We've only won 2 since November the 18th through to January the 1st. That Wycombe game, it was almost like it was meant to be the start of the new era. Jack Moylan had joined the club and was eligible to play. Joe Taylor came in on loan. We recalled Freddie Draper. It was almost like, not when I say ground zero, but you know what I mean. It was almost like that. This is where it starts. This is going to be great. And then we were 1-0 down after half an hour. Dale Taylor, a player we'd been linked with, I think, in the previous summer as well, didn't play particularly well. Like, for me, if we lose that game, you're looking at then Derby and Peterborough coming up. I think it would have been a really, really difficult a difficult sell, if you know what I mean, especially even given that we drew the next 2 games. So that goal from Ethan Arahan, for me, it didn't save Michael Skubala's job. That would be ludicrous to say. But that goal for me from Ethan Arahan was just like, it was almost like the first, when in a horror movie where the bad guy like suddenly the punches his way through to start climbing out the ground or something like that. It was that first kind of, here we are. We're ready to go.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And you mentioned earlier that match had to be the start of the new era. It was the opening of the transfer window. There was a little bit of a gap from that defeat at Blackpool, even though that was New Year's Day, I think, wasn't it? But the transfer window hadn't opened at that point. Opened the next day. We called Fred Draper, signed Joe Taylor. We were able to actually play 2 up top against Wycombe for the first time for weeks. And it felt like there'd been a little bit of time for Michael to get his feet under the table. And that goal from Ethan Arahan allowed it to be this new era and the new beginning. And of course, it was, as it turned out, the start of an incredibly great 16-game unbeaten run, which took us to the brink of the playoffs. But without that Arahan goal, it does feel difficult to imagine that the following 15 matches go how they did.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, although we weren't particularly good against Wycombe that day, when you look at the team that they had, the team they put out, like Wycombe are fairly solid and robust anyway, but Sam Vokes and Dale Taylor and Gareth McClearley, and on the bench they had Kajua, who's the West Ham lad who's at Luton now, who's really good. Cohen came off the bench. Vincent Young, who'd played Championship football. Chris Farino. They'd got it was actually a really good side, and it was tough for Michael. We can look back with hindsight, like away at Wycombe, home to Derby, home to Peterborough. They're 3 really tough games, and when you're coming out of a run that actually was, Northampton at home should really have taken something from that. Wigan away maybe could have done. It was a tough Christmas, and then it was a tough next spell. But for me, lose that, come away from that, the boos ring out loud, and sometimes a crowd can reach a tipping point, and it goes over. And I think that was just that moment where there was a real togetherness. I mean, it wasn't a classic goal, if I remember, kind of looped up and over and in. But it was just almost like a moment that kind of stuck the flag in the sand. And it bought Michael a little bit of a window, to which then obviously we got 2 0-0 draws, both of which were seen as good performances, even though literally we took 3 points from a possible 9.
Yeah, absolutely. But it was, like I said, the beginning, and it was probably the foundations had started to be built, hadn't they? Shall I move on to mine now, which is kind of part of that?
Yeah, so I mean, basically, a couple of games later, we've got a couple of 0-0 draws. We then go to Burton. I seem to think win 1-0 with 10 men. Alex Mitchell sent off. So we're seeing the green shoots of recovery. But you've picked something that happened kind of a month and a half on from the Wycombe game.
Yeah, so the ninth match of our 16-match unbeaten run was a 3-0 home win against Shrewsbury, and I just feel this was a really, really significant performance more than result, because obviously we picked up some really good points from that moment. And I think what's really pivotal about this game is what Michael Skubala inherited compared to where that performance against Shrewsbury, because we were under Mark Kennedy, and we've mentioned this countless times now, solid enough defensively, didn't really give a lot away, but pretty toothless going forward in terms of underlying metrics. Yeah, we'd scored some goals, but I seem to remember we won 3-0 at home to Blackpool earlier in the season with only 5 touches in the box in the whole game. So we were really performing really quite poorly on those attacking metrics. And also, I think the key point was what happened when we didn't have the ball. We were the most passive team in the whole league. Our passes allowed per defensive action, PPDA, something we mentioned quite a lot on here. Something I put quite a lot. It's something. Well, yeah, fair point. Yeah, I put quite a lot of value on it when trying to measure over a long period of time, trying to measure performance, because for half of a game you haven't got the ball, so it's quite an important part, isn't it? But ultimately, yeah, our PPDA under Mark Kennedy averaged around the 15 mark, which was the highest and therefore most passive in League One. And we'd seen flashes of Michael's team and Michael's kind of values and approach, trying to be a bit more front-footed, playing 2 up top rather than 1 helped. We mentioned the Cambridge game not long into his reign, where we certainly showed glimpses of that more front-footed out of possession approach. And then we battered Shrewsbury 3-0. It could have been 6, I think, really, in regards to the performance. And this was a couple of matches before we went on that mazy goal-scoring run of beating Barnsley 5-1, Cambridge 6-0, and Bristol Rovers 5-0. There was a 0-0 draw against Stevenage actually immediately after the Shrewsbury game, and then it was those 3 back-to-back huge victories. But for me, this one was the most dominant of them all in terms of performances, and I think it was the first 90-minute long performance which we saw what we now accept as the standard and the identity that Michael Skubala has created for Lincoln City. But it was probably the first that really displayed a lot of those characteristics that we now just take for granted. PPDA in the first 15 minutes was just 5, and it was 41 for Shrewsbury. Over the whole game, it was 6.54. So it was well under half what it was under Mark Kennedy. So it just looked so much different to Mark Kennedy's Lincoln City. It felt so much different to Mark Kennedy's Lincoln City. And we got the result that kind of legitimized it as well. And it was just, for me, a really pivotal point where you go, okay, this is what it's all about. This is what we've been building up to. If this is what Michael Skubala's Lincoln City is like, I think I'm up for this. I think I'm bought into this. And of course, the next few games helped as well. But for me, that was the first of those where we really felt it.
Yeah, you see, I remember, I think either I'd given you a lift or you'd given me a lift. I think normally I'd pick you up on a night game around that time, wouldn't I? And we'd go for dinner with food with Dad at the Poacher. I remember coming away and we'd been saying for a couple of games, somebody's going to get a tonking. And I think we'd beaten Exeter 1-0. Joe Taylor had scored. Just been away to Port Vale. I'm just looking at that now. That was a big one as well. I can barely remember that. I'd been away with Matt. We'd started winning games and you could tell that we were beginning to deliver that front-footed football. And look, we've had broken promises, by the way, several times. You know, Michael Appleton was wanting to get us in the Championship. He took us close, but then the second season, it was broken promises. Mark Kennedy wanted to play front-footed attacking football. We only saw that once against Bristol Rovers. And let's not forget that day, Bristol Rovers had 1 fit centre-back and Joey Barton left him on the bench. So whilst the 6-3 win looks like it was, we blew them away, it's not the flex that Mark Kennedy probably thought it was that we scored 6 that day, particularly. There was a couple of things about this Shrewsbury performance as well that actually, when you look at it, were really interesting foreshadowing for the future, because we talked about desperately needing forwards, and Joe Taylor had come in and Freddie Draper had come back and Jack Moylan had come in. So there was a lot of talk about needing those players. Actually, only Joe Taylor played that game. Freddie Draper didn't come off the bench. Jack Moylan did. So it was actually a real nucleus of the kind of the squad that, I mean, Conor McGrandles is in there who had coming back on loan, but like House, Bishop, Hackett, Arahan, Sorensen, Mitchell, Rowan, O'Connor, they were stalwarts from pre-Blackpool. So this was just Michael Skubala using a lot of the players he had got already at the club, supposedly when we were desperate for reinforcements, and actually turning it into the vision that he wanted to deliver. And people can talk about Barnsley and Cambridge and Bristol Rovers after that. We played better in this game. And it was this game that finally, because let's be honest, up until this game, we hadn't really given anybody a proper tonking at home and dominated since pre-COVID, dare I say, potentially, because we didn't see anything at Sincilbank when we were thrashing MK Dons 4-0. And like you said, the Wickham and the Blackpool games at the beginning of the season under Mark Kennedy, we had 4 or 5 touches in the box. We won 3-0. It could just as easily have been 0-0. So yeah. I think it's a great pick. And actually, when we came in we did our picks, I think both of us had kind of picked that game and gone, that was a real turning point for us.
Yeah, I suppose just to add a couple of bits, it's quite funny looking back at the numbers. I know it's not all about numbers, but it is funny when you look back, because we've become so accustomed now to not having as much of the ball as our opposition. We're normally in the 40s-ish now. I know we had a spell where we were maybe in 30s and stuff, but we were generally around 40 to 50 now. But we generally have loads more touches in the box than our opposition, more shots, more on target, more of those from inside the box, more passes inside the opposition box. And just looking back at the numbers, this one just stands out like a sore thumb. It's like, this is what is just normal now. But for me, it was the first time where we saw it for a full 90 minutes. And like I said, it kind of justified it because of the result and how Shrewsbury just couldn't get out of their half. We smothered them for the full 90 minutes. And it was a bit of a statement, I think. So it's just interesting to look back, like, where did what we now perceive to be our identity and our style start? Obviously, it started well before this match, but this is where it was first, I think, fully on show.
Yeah, I agree. Now, it's odd because we picked 10 moments that have, I don't know really how we're describing it. Is it defined the Skubala era? Is it built the Skubala era? And we go from here, past all of those wins, past the brief flirtation with the playoffs, past the entire stadium applauding when we went 2-0 down against Portsmouth, which was one of the moments of the season. But we've gone past all that because it was actually a little bit of it was a red herring for me. It was a great campaign to get so close but so far. But it was actually also kind of forcing Michael Skubala's hand a little bit, because he came in with a team that played 3 at the back. He showed us against Shrewsbury and Cambridge and Bristol Rovers and Barnsley that playing that, actually, look at the success we've had. So because we came within a whisker of promotion the following season, it did actually probably hinder a little bit, which we're going to come to in a moment, because that's another one of the points. So neither you nor me have gone Portsmouth last game of the season, fan unity, all of that. And I just think that's strange. I wanted to kind of just ask you quickly about us not picking that, because do you think that that's you and I, and maybe the people here in the chat will agree or disagree, kind of saying, well, for a successful team, whether the fans are on side or not, probably isn't a defining moment.
It's interesting because it was one of the moments of the season, and it's something that will stick in my memory, I honestly think, for the rest of my life, because I'd never seen or even heard of anything like that in football before. A team losing and being applauded during the game, and the whole stadium. It was a magical moment, and it was a brilliant sign of unity. It really, really was. So you're right. It is a bit strange that neither of us picked it, but we did this completely independently, and neither of us did pick it. So maybe it wasn't a defining moment in terms of what allowed us to get to where we are now. But I imagine there are a lot of intangibles that were part of it that you can't really describe. But yeah, for me, it was probably more on pitch stuff, or at least squad and management related things rather than fan related moments. For me, when we were discussing it, was more Michael Skubala, not directly, but at least indirectly, that we were talking about here. I suppose that was more of an organic moment. But like, what a moment! But it's interesting, isn't it, that neither of us picked it at all?
Yeah. What one of us did pick, and it was me, was a signing that pre-season that I think also went some way to leading us down the path as to where we are now. And that was the signing of Tendai Darikwa. And that's what I picked. And it's not specifically Darikwa coming in. Part partly is, but it's not specifically that. So let me explain. And there's actually, I'll take both facets to it. So first of all, Lasse Sorensen goes, and there's a genuine concern at that point, like that one of our best players is going. And when I say best, I mean application, energy, endeavour, likability. I'm not talking technically, because I think we always said Lasse wasn't technically gifted. He was a strange anomaly in that he came from a kind of a Premier League academy, and he had all of the attributes that Premier League academy players tend not to have straight away, in the hard work, the tracking back, the likability. But he didn't have the attributes you expect them to have, the slick skills on the ball, the end product, all that sort of thing. So anyway, but Lasse goes, we've got to replace him. So that's question number one. When a big player goes, it's always about replacement. And we know under Michael Appleton, when we lost George Grant and Theo Eden, couldn't replace those players. So you've got that fear. We've got to almost to the playoffs, just a point outside, one of your best players goes. Fear. So that's the first thing, is that we booked the trend by replacing. We replaced, by the way, with hindsight, with a fantastic player. Not just a player, not just a right wing back, who then actually has ended up at right back just as well. Not just but our captain as well, like just a leader, just somebody that is absolutely focused. And you and I were lucky because we met him briefly before we'd seen him kick a ball for the club, and it was at a sponsors event. And like normally you go up to the players, don't you, at these sponsors events? But Tendai was going around everybody. He wasn't even captain at that point. Like, he's going around everybody, shaking the hand. I'm Tendai, and chatting about things. Brilliant. So they're the kind of the individual bits about the move. But it was actually to focus on going for a player who didn't fit the so-called model. And that had become a little bit of a millstone, I think, not particularly around the club's neck, but it felt like it was something that was weighing the club down from the outside. People would go, we're not going to sign that player because he doesn't fit the model. It was like the only way we were ever going to get success in the eyes of some. And Mark Kennedy alluded to not being able to sign older players when he went to Swindon, which, to be fair to him, he had a decent point. But it was like, if we needed to sign, we were signing young players, we were signing hungry players, but sometimes we lacked that experience. We lacked that little bit of leadership. We lacked that little bit of just something. Tendai Darikwa coming in was a signal. We'll sign the right people to get us to where we want to go. And if that's developing players, sometimes it's not the player you sign that's being developed, but he's helping doing the developing. And I think a lot of our younger players are better for playing next to Tendai Darikwa, and subsequently Adam Reach and Sonny Bradley and James Collins as well.
Yeah, totally agree on both points. It's I don't think we need to repeat the impact that he's had just on the pitch. But I do want to just touch on Lasse briefly, because, as I mentioned before, Michael inherited a squad that was playing back three. Even though in hindsight we've now learned that isn't necessarily his preferred shape, but he didn't want to rip everything up that was working, because we were good defensively at that point. But a huge part of the positives that were allowing us to have that great run and almost get into the playoffs was Lasse Sorensen, who was a pretty unique player, wasn't he? Like, his engine was unbelievable. He patrolled the whole of that right flank. He could have the recovery pace to get back. I thought he was irreplaceable at the time. I thought we'd sign a right wing back. I thought we'd sign a right wing back that would be capable, because I still trusted the club to do well. But I didn't think we'd sign anyone who would have a greater impact on the whole club than Lasse Sorensen did, because he loads off the pitch. He was really likable, in addition to being really effective in the role that he was playing. Tendai came in, and just in terms of on the pitch, and it didn't take many games to tick by for the majority of the fan base to go, bloody hell, he's even better than Lasse. Like, didn't think that was possible. But I think you're right. It was more the statement of not the step away from the so-called model, but the willingness to, like you say, sign the right players, and to maybe see the value in having the right experience around the younger group as well, to allow them to thrive. And one thing we're going to touch on later, not to give it away too much, is Jovon Makama. I'm sure that's not going to be a surprise to anybody. And Tendai Darikwa has clearly has been said to have had quite a big impact on Jovon, and we all know kind of how he's progressed and where he is now. So just such an influential figure in himself, but also from a wider perspective. You know, our foundation of the success this season is built upon that experience in key areas that then allows the younger players to do what they've done as well. And Tendai was probably the first piece to that jigsaw, really, wasn't he?
Now, funnily enough, I actually thought when I first saw the words Tendai Darikwa on my screen, I was out in the bar playing pool, and I thought we'd signed Gboli Ariyibi, who had been at Forest. He was a Chesterfield lad signed by Forest, and he had gone to Greece. I think he was playing for a Greek side at the time, or he had left the Greek side by then, but he had initially gone over to Greece as well. So I was kind of, and I think we signed, I know we signed Tendai from Cyprus, but it was genuinely just got my players mixed up. When I looked and saw it was Tendai, I thought, well, he's obviously coming in for coaching, because the first thing you think about any Lincoln team signing an older player was coaching. He's come in and he's been an absolute revelation. My next point, and it's another one of mine, it's point number 4, and we're already behind, which is great, is another appointment. We've fast forwarded to November. So again, we're not talking about on the field now, because we could see what we were trying to do. We've covered that in Shrewsbury. For me, it was Chris Cohen coming back to the club. And that kind of has, again, it's a double kind of, there's a double benefit here. First of all, the raw benefit. It's Chris Cohen. We know how good he had been. He'd been assumed to play quite a significant role behind the scenes in the run at the end of the previous season. Gone off to Stoke to be with Stephen Schumacher. They've got the sack. He comes back to Lincoln, November 2024. So we're getting somebody here that has been an assistant at Luton and at Southampton. So he's managed right up there. You've got Michael Skubala, the tactician. Now you've got somebody that's got experience with handling kind of high pressure dugout situations. Michael Skubala had handled big players. They were young, but they were big players. You know, there's no misconception there. Tom Shaw, great Lincoln lad. You know, again, it just felt to me like it was completing this trio. And now there's David Priest, and obviously with Scott Fry, I've got great guys behind the scenes. But for me, Chris Cohen coming back in was really significant, because he was a name, he was a big capture. And from Lincoln's point of view, we're now going to have 2 assistant head coaches. It's like, wow, you know, we're really putting something into the structure. We're really putting something into the backroom stuff. You and I, we don't see that. The fans, the 111 people at the minute who are watching live, don't see what happens day by day, week by week at the training ground. But to have that extra body there to split the training up, to have Chris up in the stands, eye in the sky, watching the game, to have that extra mouth, that extra experience is vital when you are a team like Lincoln City, who rely on tactical tweaks, rely on outsmarting the opposition, not just outworking, but outsmarting. And the likes of Chris, you know, Chris is going to have been brilliant. For instance, Peterborough, when we were 1-0 down, we had that little break. You're going to have his input from up in the stands as well as the people down on the ground. So for me, completing that backroom stuff was big. The other thing it said to me was, we're a football club that can attract the best, because I think he is one of the best coaches at this level, certainly in name and where he had been, a reputation. You know, whether he is better or worse than Tom Shaw, it's not really for comparison. But do you know what I mean? He'd gone off somewhere else into the Championship. He'd risen. You know, and he's always been coaching at that level. So to then come back to Lincoln City, for me, it was his decision to do that kind of spoke as much about the setup, in that, right, those days of a so-called dressing room split, the Mark Kennedy kind of toxic atmosphere where we lost our fitness coach, Ross Breary. I can't remember his name properly. You remember the guy I mean?
I forget his name, but I remember the guy.
Loads of people, staff members were leaving. Now people wanted to come back, and having gone and come back, I think that was huge.
Yeah, totally agree. Once again, the word culture gets used quite a lot these days, but I think it's so powerful and it's so relevant for our club. You know, we know we're built upon people at the club being, or the whole unified kind of collective of the whole club is kind of greater than the sum of the parts. They've got good parts, but I think what we're achieving is greater than the sum. But like we said, we've got pretty good sums, haven't we? We've got pretty good parts. But also, it wasn't always like that. And prior to Michael Skubala coming in and changing the culture, he has to have had a huge impact on that. You know, the book stops with him. He's part of a wider team, but he's the guy with his name on the door at the end of the day. So attracting Chris back, I think, first and foremost was, massive. But part of that must be that culture in that what is now clearly built. It's just huge for us. And it's something you can't really measure. You can't really put your finger on it. You can see it though. You can see it. And we discussed on a couple of pods previous. Maybe we don't necessarily like to see the club getting fined for some things that are happening after the final whistle. Particularly Exeter with a bit of shenanigans post match. But one thing that Ben mentioned when we discussed that was it's just such a sign of unity. Everyone has each other's back, and you can't really buy that. You can't really create that out of nowhere. It has to be built over time. And Chris wanted to come back to the club, showed as much as to what happened in the time that he had left, in terms of that culture changing, as much as the impact he's clearly had since he came back as well. It did allow increased specialisation. The workload for each member of the staff clearly has been reduced so they can do more on certain specific elements. Detail is such an important part of our game plan. So allowing each member of staff to be able to go into finer detail makes a lot of sense. And I do think it's quite big that he watches the game, particularly the first half, from the gantry. I think you have a different vantage point. He sits next to the analysts, so he has that kind of direct conversation with them. And we've mentioned this season something that is quite clear to see is how tactically astute we are, how tactically adaptable, and in more games than not, I would say tactically superior than our opponents. And Chris Cohen must be quite a large part of that, I'd say.
Yeah. Now, moving on from Chris, he came in on November the 23rd. What followed was a pretty wretched run. 4 league wins up until the point that we're going to discuss going into the break. So 4 league wins, 10 defeats. We exited the FA Cup. We exited the Football League Trophy. We were pretty horrendous defeats at Leyton Orient, where I think it was last minute, but we'd been 2-0 down. Barnsley, who were 4-1 up at one point. It was kind of getting a little bit tough, wasn't it? And then we get to the final point before the break, a game that you think was a significant turning point.
Yes, the 4th of March, 2025. Big game. Lincoln City 4, Crawley Town 1. And as you mentioned, going into this game, we were in the midst of a run of 1 win in 7. But the bigger picture is we had played 21, won 4, drawn 7, lost 10. 19 points from 21 fixtures going into this game. 0.9 points per game for, in terms of fixtures, nearly half a season. That's a significant period of time where results were not at all what we had, let's be honest, had come to expect. Because another significant date was the 5th of October, was October the 29th of that season, which was after 12 matches. We were 5th on that date. Good start to the season. We'd played 13. We'd won 7 of those, drawn 3, lost just 3, 1.85 points per game. That was the first 13 matches of the season immediately following where we just missed out on the playoffs, which included a 16-match unbeaten run. So there was a near enough full calendar year there where we actually were picked up the second most points in League One out of any team. So we got used to picking up between 1.65 and 1.85 points per game on average for all that time. And then we had a period of not just a few games, but 21, where we were averaging the 21st in the form table for that 21 games. So we were in the relegation zone in terms of form for a significant portion of the season. And a lot of that unity that we maybe felt so special against Portsmouth on the final day of the previous season, the great start to this, the current campaign as we're discussing it, and then a lot of that positivity just started to wane. There was quite a lot of discontent, I think, just starting to seep through from some areas of the fan base. And it felt like the fan base was quite split at that point. There was some defiance in, no, absolutely, we need to keep hold of Michael Skubala, but there was not a quiet part of the fan base that was starting to have a few doubts. And this felt like a defining moment that we needed to get a big win that just took us away from any sort of mentions of relegation, because the reality, we were only 13th in the league. We weren't that close to relegation, but our form was pretty poor. But this would just drag us away from it. And not only did we win, we won really convincingly. So, of course, we conceded an early goal, but from that point, performance was superb. Actually, quite similar to the Shrewsbury game that I mentioned from the season before, in that we just battered them. Really, we didn't let them out. We were clinical once we had our opportunities, but it felt like the sort of performance that we had seen the season before and earlier that season. It felt like we were on the front foot. We were kind of playing the game on our terms again, and it's honestly the most relief I've felt at Sincil Bank for years. Actually, that game, because I was pro Michael Skubala throughout that whole time, and we were really lucky. I think that was the sort of time that we were invited to go to the training ground for the first time and interview Michael. So we were incredibly lucky to be able to speak to the bloke. And when you do, you realise how different he is to other football managers, and you realised how we are on the right path, even though it doesn't always look like it. But it felt difficult to defend that at time, and we had to get a result at some point just to prove that was the case. And for me, this was the moment where it was all, there we go, right, we can relax now. That was more like us. That was what we come to expect, and we got our just desserts from the performance that we put in, because there were still, even in some of those games that we didn't get results in, there were still some positives. But there's only so long that you can find positives in defeats, isn't there? And yeah, that game just felt absolutely huge to be able to just kind of calm everyone down a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I think you say we were 13th, but actually 43 points, and I think Crawley were on 29. So there was only 10 points between us and 21st. And bear in mind, the season before, we'd kind of made 10 points up to get into the playoffs. It's easier, I think, to lose 10 points when you're in a spiral than it is to lose 10 points when you're doing quite well. So, and for me, it was the anti-Skubala stuff that was coming out. I think that was, the tide was beginning to turn post Barnsley. There was quite a lot of Skubala out messages, and maybe I was wrong last week to kind of provoke that a little bit by doing a little search, and I put in our private chat, a long list of all of the Skubala out messages on Twitter, and kind of put never forget. I didn't do it publicly. I'm not that insightful with an S, with a C, not an S. It was nice to kind of just draw a little bit of a line under that, and of course, a week or so later, we also went and beat Bristol Rovers 5-0 for a second time. So, yeah, it was a big moment. Right, as we have already massively overrun, which is typical.
Surprise.
Yeah, long way. We'll take a break and we will come back to you in just a moment. Brilliant. 43 minutes, which is good. It's 20 seconds earlier than before. Now, I'm not going to go through everybody. Insightful, as in insightful, inciting a riot, Richard, was what I was thinking. And Clive wants a wave. Give him a wave. Chris, give him one of your trademark waves. Whee! Is that rain? Oh, my Lord. It's absolutely hammering it down out here. Right. So, again, brilliant. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Walter has put loving the chat, which is really good. So we're going to drop back in, because we just do this little bit for a commercial break. I can't really go through and say hello to everybody because there's too many of you watch now, which is incredibly humbling. So thank you very much. So we've got 5 more points to go. Little internal note for me and Chris. Probably need to be a little bit snappier, don't we? We've both gone on a little bit, but
yeah,
we'll be fine. We'll come back in anyway. Hello and welcome back to part 2. Somebody's just tried to sell you something, whether you buy it or not. We don't care, because we get paid just for giving them the opportunity to hawk their wares to you. No idea what it is. Hopefully it's not the sun, because I wouldn't encourage anybody to buy that. Not even if you want to light the fire. Other newspapers are available, and they burn better, apparently. Although there's nothing quite as satisfying as watching a copy of the Sun or the Daily Mail burn. If only I could burn GB News as well. That would be phenomenal. So in the break, I did give myself and Chris a little warning about, please, let's hurry it up, because we've only got 16 minutes left. And Richard says, carry on as before. We all love it. So sod it. This one could go to an hour and 20 minutes. We had 5 points before the break. 5 seminal moments of Michael Skubala's Lincoln City career and what's led us to the cusp of a potential promotion. And point number 6 is another one from Mr. Lamming, and it's pretty much happened at the same time as the Crawley win.
Yeah, I sent these to you as 2 separate points, and then only in my research did I realise that they actually overlapped quite a lot. So my point just before the break was the Crawley match in isolation. But my next point is the last 12 matches of last season, which just so happened to be the first of which was the Crawley game, but I didn't actually realise that until looking into it in a bit more depth. But that Crawley match was the first of 12 consecutive fixtures towards the end of last season in which we started in a back 4 shape and ditched the 3-5-2 that was so successful from the season before. And it was basically just that moment that allowed Michael to plan ahead and for the collectively to make that decision. We're going to play in the way that we want to play now. We're not going to try and recreate something that I'm not going to say that we stumbled upon, but that maybe evolved from a previous era. We're going to do exactly what we're brought in here to try and do. It's quite brave to do that mid-season, I'd say. The Crawley game gave probably a little bit of breathing room to allow to have the confidence to be able to do this for the rest of the season. But what that allowed us to do really was treat the final 12 games of last season as a really extended pre-season for this coming season. It was 12 matches of practice, really, so that we could have our system in place, our ethos in place, really, some of those characteristics that, again, mentioned before, that we've become so synonymous with. Really, we'd class it as our identity, but that only really was set in stone in the final quarter of last season. So because we were safe, we weren't going up, we weren't going down, as much as that was disappointing because we were in the playoffs after the first quarter of the season, it was a 12-match long consistent period where we could effectively practice and get everything nailed in for this season. And that hasn't gone too badly in the end, has it?
No, it hasn't at all. And it's really interesting because, like you just said, with it was like almost like a staging area for this season was after Crawley and was the change in shape. And, you know, I alluded to actually the season before being a little bit of a millstone around Michael Skubala's neck because he kind of had to play 3 at the back, because if he goes 5 at the back and it was a bad start, people go, why have you changed it? We nearly went up last season. So he was almost at a point, I think, where it wasn't a case of him now going, I can do it now. But I think actually losing a few games gave him the opportunity to be a little bit more flexible and to try and change things a little bit and go back more towards his footballing ethos. I actually think we were really good in the last few games of last season against some really good sides. And I mean, the Stockport game, which was the day before the London Marathon, sticks in my mind. I think we lost 3-2, did we? And they were outstanding. But the teams we were playing were all in and around the playoffs. And I've said it before on the podcast. Yes, we were the henchmen. We were the byline playing a role in somebody else's story. But watching that gentle evolution at the end of the season, that kind of march from Crawley onwards and the change to 4 at the back, it really was the final kind of elements and bits falling into place. The problem is we don't see it at the time. And like you and I try, and Ben and Charlie and Emily and everybody, you try and see the pictures, but you can never tell the proper story without hindsight and the full narrative. So we're looking at that going, we look all right. Is this a step forward? Are we doing well now? But you don't really know. And when somebody else is going off to the playoffs and somebody else is all going up automatically and you're the one sticking around, the next season you actually think is a hard reset. It's like at the end of every season, players come and players go. Not every season, as we'll find out. But it's almost like a reset. See, we almost take each season as an individual story. Whereas actually, the point you've made there is spot on, that the end of last season was actually the kind of the hard start, the hard final start of the story that we've got now. The Michael Skubala story isn't about 23-24 or 24-25 or 25-26. It's about November 2023 to wherever we're going to go to. It's one long continuation. And we were talking last night over dinner, like we remember things by football. Like, we live our life in seasons. If he'll say to me, we went on holiday somewhere, and I won't go, oh, that was 2024. I'll go, oh, yeah, that was pre-season of the 23-24 season. That's how I remember it. And sometimes we fall into that trap of compartmentalizing every single season as something different, and it's not. And this one, we ended that season on a high, and then we started this season, a la point number 6, on what felt like an absolute low.
Jovon Makama left the football club on the eve, or actually the day of the opening day of the season, of course. But I think hindsight really is a wonderful thing. It became quite a seminal moment, didn't it? I think this is huge for a number of reasons, to be honest with you, Gaz. Number one, let's just look at it from the purely financial perspective, though, because we're looking at this as a key moment that allowed us to get to where we are now. So we're looking at the positives associated with this, really, even if in the moment it felt positive and negative, because him leaving as the first ever £1 million plus exit from Lincoln City it's just such a benchmark, isn't it? And we knew that we couldn't turn down money like that. No one would expect us to turn money down like that. Certainly at that time. But also, Jovon had been great. The shape change for the previous 12 games really suited him. He thrived in that back part of the season before. He had a really strong pre-season as well. And we were all really excited, I think, about how Jovon could have a really, really, really big season. I think he absolutely ran in our only pre-season friendly against West Brom when we scored 4 goals. He was unplayable in that match. So we're all super excited just to see him. And yeah, to see him leave, of course, on that first game of the season was a strange moment, particularly because we'd also lost at the time what we thought were incredibly key, important players that maybe were irreplaceable. Arahan had left the club. Sean Rowan had also left the club, and so on. And Paulie, of course, the keeper from the season before, had left the club. We knew those 3 were leaving. We didn't expect to lose Jovon that summer, and we did. What's happened since then, though, is the financial side has been great. Of course, we don't know exactly, but you'd imagine that financial side has allowed us to be slightly more proactive in the transfer market this season. Maybe there's 1 or 2 moves that we could stretch to, or we could bring forward, or we could. Or some contracts maybe that we could extend earlier than we would usually do so, because of that extra little bit in the bank. Now, the club will never spend it all in one go. We know that they're really frugal, and they're very aware you can only spend it once, but they generally spend it pretty well, don't they? But you imagine that extra bit in the bank account can only have had a positive impact in the transfer market this season, sorry. But I do think it's bigger than that. And maybe that isn't necessarily a discussion around how it's impacted this season, but I think it can impact the future quite a lot. I feel that we've got that reference point now, because if ever in the future there is a moment where a young player is maybe perceived to be struggling a little bit, there's now a reference point where we can go, yeah, but remember Jovon Makama? It's rather than it being a theory. And I remember we had an argument with someone in the pub about it years ago, because we felt he had potential, but it was understandable why not everyone could see that. So it's just nice that rather than us just hoping we're right, we've got a reference point. So yeah, but remember that. And it's probably the first time that we'd seen a player come through we'd seen his whole development. We'd seen him getting thrown in at the deep end. And again, that game against Blackpool you mentioned earlier in the podcast, he played up front on his own in that game and looked incredibly isolated. That wasn't really his fault, but it looks bad on him. And there were some games where he didn't always look completely the player that he turned into, because he wasn't. He had to grow. He had to develop. He had to have that exposure that allowed him to develop. But we just saw it with our own eyes rather than him being out on loan somewhere else and other fan base see it instead. So I understand it, but it's also justification, isn't it? Because we've now seen every stage. We now know what development actually looks like with our own eyes. So we can now, with a reasonable amount of confidence, just use that as a reference point. And hopefully what that means is the whole fan base we can now just have that little bit more patience and understanding of what development really looks like. It was no one's fault. We just never seen it before as a fan base, really. And now we have. So I think it can be bigger than just this season. But in relation to this season itself, the finances obviously help. And it was also quite big for Rob Street, who's become quite an important player for us this season. Rob Street wouldn't have started that game against Reading if Jovon Makama hadn't been sold. Rob Street was definitely going to be part of the squad, but I don't think he was going to be a guaranteed starter. That allowed Rob to get his run in the team, and he's been a great player for us, and he's grown quite a lot this season as well. So I just think that was a huge moment that has had probably more upsides than we expected it to.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting moment. It's one I picked in as one of the 4 key periods of this season was, Mo from Jovon not being in the squad to us beating Reading. It just felt like this roller coaster ride across a single day. And I disagree a little bit because I actually don't think we've seen the benefits of the financials as yet. Maybe with Ivan Varfolomiev, yes. But I think the other players that this has allowed us to bring in, we've not really seen. In Josh Honohan, Deji Eloweri are probably the 2 that it's allowed us to go out and be kind of quite aggressive with. So I think that it's almost a part of that. It plays into the last bit that we were talking about. It's almost like it's a part of a bigger picture that as yet we haven't particularly seen. It has allowed us to be a little bit freer. And also, we don't know what we'll make off the back of it further down the line as well. But that first £1 million sale coming under Michael Skubala, because it was promised under Michael Appleton, not by him, but you know what I mean? Like, it looked like we might have a player that was worth that. There was Sean Rowan and Lewis Monsmer, and then under Mark Kennedy, like, those players are still there, and you're hoping that there might be something. So for it to actually happen was indication of what we were doing right, and justification, I think, for the likes of Tendai Darikwa, who it's rumoured took Jovon under his wing, and the likes of sticking with some of these younger players during the tougher times. So I really like that. Now, if yours is, that next one was kind of a physical thing. Mine is almost a little bit symbolic, because point number 8 of the 10 that we are running down is beating Stevenage at home this season. Now, Michael Skubala's first game was against Stevenage away, 18th of November 2023, and we were poor. You can't really change an awful lot when you first come in. He had kind of the team was Jensen, Jackson Ioma, Mitchell, Sorensen, Arahan, Ali Smith, Hamilton Mandroyu, Jack Burrows, Jack Vale, Jaden Brown came on, Hakiba Delikin came on, Okawoy and Shadipo were on the bench. Now Okawoy was on the bench. Do you know what I mean? So that was ground zero, so to speak. And it was poor, and we were bullied, and we were smashed all over the place, and we never looked like getting anything. And then they came to Sincilbank later that season. We needed the win to kind of cement a playoff plot. They frustrated us, they bullied us, they pushed us about an awful lot, all that sort of stuff. Got a 0-0 draw. We thought it was a good result. We thought, well, actually, no, at the time, I thought it was the end of our playoff push. But as it was a good result. Last season, 24-25, we went to Stevenage. They bullied us. They pushed us about. It was horrible. Paddy O'Connor was sent off for getting dragged into something with Piagiani. We won, but it was a penalty. We never looked like scoring from open play. Then they came to us at Christmas, and you may know there's a running theme here. They bullied us. They pushed us about. We got frustrated. We never looked like we were going to score. They never looked like they were going to score. That was when we went back to the pub afterwards, and we got in an argument about Jovon Makama because it was just spoiling. It was just unhappy. It's Stevenage. Oh, it's always the same. This season, like, we came to the Stevenage game in October. We'd had a really good September. Like, what we were doing was probably conducive to beating teams that wanted to attack us. We've been saying it for so long. Like, if a team wants to come and attack us, we can take them on. We can do that. We could even do it under Kennedy, beating Barnsley and Ipswich and stuff. Like, we can be tight. We can look for the breaks. We've been getting better. We beat Peterborough. We beat Luton. It felt like we'd beaten Chelsea because we were able to get into the game of football, let them have possession. Stevenage in October, they were top or second. They were around there, if I remember correctly. And it just had written all over it, it's going to be stodgy, it's going to be nasty, it's always the same against them. And we were excellent. Like, XG ours was something like, I haven't got it in front of me, I can't look at it now. It's something like 2.4 for us off from memory, 0.2 for them. They barely got a chance. It should have been 3 or 4-0. on a better day. We were just so good, and obviously we've referenced it a lot on the podcast. That kind of immediately after that, I was going, are we actually good? Like, because this is the team. They were a benchmark. They were doing well. We felt that we were desperate to cling on to the coattails of sixth, and Stevenage were a team that we'd looked at and gone, they're going to be there or thereabouts. They're strong. They're good at everything that actually it turns out we're good at, but we just had loads more stuff that we were good at that they can't do as well. And I just remember there was a player called Lewis Freeston, played for them. Good player, actually. He did really well from it. I remember his frustration during that game. I remember looking at it and thinking, oh, how the worm has turned. Like, what a contrast this is. It looked like the sort of domination that we experienced at their place in Michael Skubala's first game. It just felt to me, it's like now it's gone full circle. And, I could have said that against Bolton and Ian Everts Bolton. If we'd beaten Bolton this season, I might have picked that as, because Ian Everts Bolton were always we get bullied, but for me, it was Stevenage at home. It's 1-0. We win. Actually, in fairness, that then triggered a run. I think we went on a bit of a run after that where we were pretty poor. If I remember correctly, I said, are we good? The general consensus was, my God, we are good. We've beaten Stevenage. And then we lost to Orient, drew with Bradford, went out the FA Cup at Salford and lost 3-0 to Rotherham. So it was almost like a little reminder. But yeah, that was a big game.
Yeah, it hasn't gone badly after that little run, though, has it? But this was a big game because of like you say, the reference point. And if it's possible to thrash someone 1-0, we did that game. Stevenage didn't have a shot on target in the whole game. And some of the cornerstones that you now associate with Lincoln City and take for granted, and we mentioned them earlier in terms of that identity and not having all the ball, but being really efficient with it, restricting the opposition, being really clinical ourselves, and despite not having as much of the ball, having more shots on target, more touches in the opposition box. So from the attacking metrics, just being utterly dominant despite not having all of the ball. And there was a game this season where we did it, but against a team who usually does that to their opposition, or from the defensive perspective at least. They are a team that were pretty similar to us in a lot of ways. And I felt if we were going to be successful this season, we would do well to do a lot of the things that Stevenage had done well. Didn't ever expect us to have the attacking output that we've had this season. Did maybe think that we were building to have that solidity that Stevenage had. Obviously, we had the set piece dominance of the season before that we hope to continue with. But this just showed us that, oh, wow, yes, we've got that in abundance, but we've got something extra here. We've got something that Stevenage haven't got. And yeah, we only won 1-0, but the performance was justifiably better than a 1-0 win. And yeah, albeit a little bit of a sticky run of results after that, but it showed what this group of players was capable of, what Michael Skubala's kind of ethos was when it clicks. And then, yeah, obviously from the second half of the season, really, it's been pretty consistent from there. But it's because it was Stevenage, I think, isn't it, that this felt quite important. It's because they are the team that most other teams really don't look forward to going and playing at their ground. They know it's going to be hard. They know it's going to be a tough afternoon. And that's exactly what we did at Sincil Bank. And it was nice to kind of put the shoe on the other foot.
I think it was also nice to bounce back from having lost to Exeter the week before from the late goal as well. It was nice to kind of turn that dominance, and it was kind of putting minds at rest a little bit. And even though the results after that did worry us again, it was a big moment for me. And actually, when I picked my 4 periods of the season that I thought were absolutely vital, I really wanted to tag this on to September, but I couldn't justify going, September and the 18th of October, because it's not really a period, is it? It's 2 periods. And I didn't want to do 5 periods because the 5th period I'm hoping is going to be Easter. Now, we've picked 8 things that we think were points in time, moments in time, things that have led us to where we are now. Funnily enough, the next 2 things are not moments in time, points in time, or really single occurrences. They're a little bit different. They're a little bit off-piste. I'm actually really interested to know how you're going to tie yours in to this season rather than a looking forward thing, but I'm sure that you have it all perfectly planned out. But point number 9 is mine, and it plays into, I think, the run that we've been on recently, because let's not kid ourselves, the 22-game unbeaten run has been like not just icing on the cake, it's been like icing on the cake and a full tank of petrol in your van at the same time kind of thing. It really has been like of the whole Michael Skubala era. this is the crown. This is almost like the coronation. We haven't won anything yet, but it's 22 games unbeaten. You are magnificent. Bromley have lost. You're the only team that's unbeaten in 2026. Lincoln City, you've blown everybody else away. Like, even, like, we are better than everybody in the division, and this run has proven it. So for me, it's something that has contributed to this run, something that has polished the crown, and that is 2 defeats, which may sound a little bit crazy, but the 2 defeats are Salford in the FA Cup and Huddersfield in the not all glass windscreen shield, leasing.com Virtua Trophy.
The trophy. Let's just call it the
Mickey Mouse Trophy. It's the eradication of cup competitions long before we celebrated New Year. And it might not sound like a positive. And I remember after the Salford game, people were incandescent with rage, wanting an FA Cup run, and we can't go out to Salford, and it's a disgrace. And, there was even some Michael Skubala's not suitable wobbles there as well from the people that are a little bit more wobbly than Mr. Blobby. But that's a cultural reference that certain ages won't get. It is. It's not a reference to Steve Evans, who has done incredibly well on his weight loss journey. It's a reference to a large pink and yellow character created by Noel Edmonds, who lived at the fictional Crinkly Bottom. Anyway, so we lose to Salford. So what do? We then don't have a game FA Cup second round weekend, so we get a little bit of a break just before Christmas. When did this run start? I mean, it's a brilliant question. We lost to Wycombe Wanderers on the 22nd of November. And then we only played 2 league games, 29th and 9th. In between that, we had another cup game, Huddersfield. We lost that 2-0. So what does that mean? We then don't have to play midweek fixtures when other teams do. And I think it's crucial, because what we do as a club, and I've mentioned it already on the podcast, is we're better than other people at tactics. That sounds so ungrammatically. It's just incorrect grammatically, but we do tactics better. But tactically, we're better than our opposition. We prepare for our opposition. We understand how we're going to beat them and how we're going to stop them. Players have individual game plans. How do you get that into the players' time on the training pitch? How do you get time on the training pitch? By not having a packed fixture schedule, and by giving players a rest on a Saturday afternoon when other teams are going, we've got Arsenal in the FA Cup. I mean, it's brilliant. Fantastic, Mansfield. You've had your day. Great. But your players are going to be more tired. And your league assaults can take a hit from cup competitions. Stockport, they're in the final of the Mickey Mouse Trophy. Luton, they're in the final of the Mickey Mouse Trophy. Both have had really indifferent times. Both have suffered with injuries to key players at key moments. And I think, whilst the defeat is never a good thing, and it's always a hard to swallow, I just think us going out the competitions when we did was a good thing. We had our cup run, we had the world champions at Sinsel Bank, we were on telly, everybody saw us, everyone went how good we are. So for me to have not just a week off at the beginning of December, the week off at the beginning of January as well, and then not have all of those midweek games, for me that was first rate.
Yeah, totally agree. And I imagine if you'd asked anybody in the club and fans on the outside immediately after Salford, could you see a light at the end of the tunnel or a silver lining here? The answer probably would be no. Like it's not a competition that no one likes to get knocked out of, but hindsight is a wonderful thing sometimes, isn't it? And you mentioned it's the reducing the workload on the players, but I think the timing of the breaks has been important as well, particularly the one directly after the Christmas period. We all know the relentlessness of the Christmas period. As fans, we love it. I know you maybe don't. I love it. You get football every other day, and it's fantastic, and it feels like such a large part of the season is kind of defined in a really short period of time. It's like a whole chapter of a book is is written in such a short period of time. But I love that as a fan, but completely understand and fully respect that you can't really be your best version of yourself when you're playing so much football, not only because of the physical load, but as you mentioned, the time on the training ground to fully analyse the opposition, come up with a game plan that's going to give you the best possible opportunity to win that game, and then implement that on the Saturday with only minimal time to actually do that on the training pitch. So it makes total sense that you don't get the best version of yourselves over Christmas. Obviously, I got some great results over that time, but then we had a couple of weeks without a game when almost everyone else in the league did have a game or two, some of them, and we came back flying, and it was just that break. It allowed to have that bit of a reset, didn't it? And then we've just been like quite literally unstoppable since then. And it's been, it's amazing the impact that not being in the FA Cup has actually had.
Well,
and the other club, of course.
At the beginning of January, we had a 13-day break, and since then we've won 11 and drawn 3. Also, it's 8:10 now, so you may be watching live, you may not be. Woking have just announced their new manager, Jermaine Defoe.
Well, that's a surprise.
I know. I've just seen it pop up in another chat on the screen. Jermaine Defoe is Woking manager. We're not going to discuss that, but that's come out of nowhere. So
I have some Woking related news that I saw earlier as well, which is that former imp Tim Akinola has just signed a new deal there.
He's been there ages, hasn't he? He's been there a while. He's done really
well.
Yeah,
but he signed a new deal that's time down till next season. Don't know why I stumbled across that earlier, but that's strange that you had some Woking news, and I saw some other Woking news earlier where we don't really have a lot of interest in Woking these days.
No, I actually have a Google alert set up on Tim Akinola, and that hasn't come through, which is interesting. Anyway, so that's 9 points that we've made. So point number 10, the final one in the journey of Michael Skubala from November the 23rd or November the 18th, 2023 to now is Chris's point.
Yeah. Tying down the whole senior squad to contracts which include next season. And that might sound strange in that how does that impact this season? You're talking about next season here, Chris. And I think it certainly helps next season. It helps tie down those players that have been successful for us into whatever happens next season. Now, it seems very likely that we're going to be playing championship football now, but at the point that all of these contracts were extended, it was a hope and an ambition, but it certainly wasn't guaranteed. But I think it's bigger than next season. I think it's had a big impact this season as well. Number one, from a player's perspective, no one likes to feel that, to have the uncertainty around their job. You know, I think some of us know how that feels, don't we? You know, both of us actually know how that feels. So when you have that peace of mind that your job is secure, it just takes that worry out of the back of your mind, and you can focus fully on the job at hand. But also that word culture again, and togetherness and unity. Every single player in this squad is going to feel part of it because they're all going to be here next year in regards to their contracts. Now, it's likely, of course, there will be some movement in the summer, but no one's out of contract. No one's going to be leaving on a free. No one's going to be leaving if it's not on their terms. Every single player that's part of the squad, whether they're getting minutes on the pitch or not, are going to feel part of this pretty miraculous journey that we're on and season that we're having. Because let's not forget, every single player in the squad, even if they're not in the squad on a match day, they're training every week. And that isn't just, they're running around, they're trying hard. They are the opponents for the first team in training. They are there to test the starters. They're there to work on impacting games when they do come on. They improve the quality of training. If you've got one or two bad eggs that aren't quite applying themselves in training, they know that they're not going to get a kick. They're not going to be here next season anyway. I don't feel like we would recruit players like that, but it is human nature to maybe not care quite so much if you don't feel part of it. That's just normal, isn't it? Every single player in our first team squad is going to feel part of this wonderful journey that we're all on. And we mentioned countless times that one of the defining characteristics of this squad, and probably the whole club, is that we are greater than the sum of the parts. We've mentioned how good the parts are, but we are greater than the sum of them. And you can't buy that. You can't just magic it up out of nowhere, but you can do everything in your power to help it along this way. And making sure that every single player feels part of it is I think, a huge part of why we've been so together, so unified, and been ultimately so successful.
Sorry, my dog was just snoring, and I'm sure it's been it was just putting people off. It was quite loud. So, yeah, I mean, the thing is, there's so many moments that we could have picked this season as kind of the defining moments, but actually it has been one big journey. And what you've done is almost opened a gateway to the next period in that, Michael Skubala's reign started with a little bit of chaos, dare I say. There was dissent in the squad. There was obviously a lot of players that we moved on quite quickly. I think from that Blackpool game, I think it was Jaden Brown, Jack Vale, Hakiba Delican and Ali Smith all played their final game. And that was within kind of a month and a half of Michael coming in. So there was some turnaround there. There was some squad churn there as well. To get to a point now where, come rain or shine, the first game of next season, we could, in theory, have exactly the same squad that we have now, bar the loan players, ready to go again. So if there wasn't a complete and utter collapse, the squad that has brushed aside much of League One is ready to go again. And that's unheard of. It's unheard of for a team to finish a season and go, well, if next season kicked off tomorrow, we're ready. What about you lot? Kind of thing. That's what it feels like. It reminds me a little bit of when you could fail your driving test in the morning, ring up and get a cancellation and be there in the afternoon, kind of like, right, I'm ready to go again. Like, here we go, I'm back in. Whereas, like, for most teams, you fail on the Monday, you've got a book and it's 3 weeks. You've got so much to do before the next time you go. Well, we're ready. We're ready to go. Dare I say, it could also be not detrimental, but dare I say, we'll be going into the championship season when some of these players that are under contract now actually may not kick off for us next season. And that's a completely different conversation. But, players that we have under contract doesn't necessarily mean come the start next season, we'll be lining up with the same team that have, if we do get promoted, or if we do win League One, our squad will still look different. There will still be some churn. But it is that, like I say, it's that peace of mind. And it's actually, you made a really good point, which kind of hadn't really struck me, in that it's almost like that solidity. It's almost like that nobody's having to play for a contract. Nobody's thinking, oh, well, I've got my contract now, because everybody has. The competition for places. It isn't like somebody's been given a contract, three of us haven't, and the one that's been given a contract is going, well, I'm the preferred boy here, because those guys are still waiting. Everybody's on board. So yeah, I think it's just reflective of, dare I say, not just Michael Skubala's Lincoln City, but Lincoln City 25-26, because we talk about Michael Skubala's Lincoln City. That's very much what we see on the pitch. And I think sometimes the things off the pitch, like we were talking earlier about Tendai and Chris Cohen and stuff, it's like Michael Skubala is the figurehead for that, and that's the point of this podcast. But it's not him that's specifically gone and signed Tendai Darikwa, or it's not him that's made the conscious effort to say, right, this is what we're going to do. It's a team. He's been involved in that, but we're talking about Jazz. As I understood it, there was a kind of a shift in mood when Harvey came in, and that we don't want to be reliant on loan players. We want to be bringing in one or two senior players, like that kind of mentality from an American sports, as in our assets need to be our assets. We don't want to borrow other people's assets, which plays in a little bit to the Darren McAntony theory. That's he doesn't want to add value to anyone else's strikers. He would rather pay £1 million for Harry Leonard and try and add value to him there than loan him, add value for him to go back. I like that. So it kind of plays into that, doesn't it? But it's structure from top to bottom. And we are now on the cusp of a new era, potentially championship football. Ron Fowler is chairman, but Clive's still there with the expertise on the board. And I think that's actually a really interesting point 10 for us to finish on, in that we've almost left it open-ended. It's like you've just watched a series and you've got to the last episode and there's a cliffhanger.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. And there are a lot of wider conversations that can happen around what this point means going forward. But the conversation today was, how has it brought us to this point in time? And yeah, even though that the contracts are signed and that they therefore involve next season, this season was already in the bag anyway. In terms of the contract length, I think there's the slightly more human side, and that's kind of more psychological side. It really does impact this season. But you're right. Yeah, it's just maybe does leave it open for I suppose the second series, if you like, for next season.
There you go. 1 hour, 19 minutes, 18 minutes given the break of a 1 hour podcast. 10 points that took Michael Skubala's Lincoln City from not crumbling, but we'd say the embryonic, not chaotic, but slightly muddled 2022-23 season to what is now the brink of history. What are your 10 points? Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you have listened in at home, thank you for doing so. If you've watched live, thank you for doing so. If you have any points that you'd like to make, please find this post somewhere on social media, be it Facebook, be it Twitter, be it anywhere else. I accidentally post it and then forget, and add all of your comments. In the meantime, Wednesday we will be back. It will be Benjamin and I believe Charlie, but I might be wrong, looking ahead to Good Friday. It could be a bloody Good Friday. It could be an amazing Friday. It could be a manic Monday. But whatever it is, you've just listened us to, all to the journey that has taken us there. Typical that. I missed up the ending. Did you notice that?
It was really good until that point.
I know, it was, wasn't it?
It was profound.
Fuck it. Up the imps.
Up the imps.